Babe of the day. Babe of the day. Warrene Ott. This 1960 starlet deserves to be recognized more than she has been. Warrene was an absolute stunner, and she had acting ability. Unfortunately, she was relegated to mostly supporting roles. She did have a big part in one movie, the god-awful The Undertaker and His Pals from 1966. Words cannot express how much I hate this movie. For many years, I considered this the absolute worst movie to have ever been made. In recent years, that distinction has been surpassed. Warrene had a dual role in this horror comedy that was more cruel than anything else. She played twin sisters who palled up with the leading man. The first one was brutally killed and turned into food at a diner. The second survives and becomes the leading lady of the picture by default. The Undertaker and His Pals was unfortunate in the way that it had some good actors in it, including Warrene, but the movie was just evil crap. Violence for the sake of violence isn't cool. But Warrene, before one of her characters gets slaughtered, is beautiful, charming, and funny. The wonderful Warrene was an entertainer since she was a toddler. Her dad was a Navy commander, and it appears he and the missus gave Warrene the princess treatment. After all, she was an only child, so it makes sense that they would have spoiled her some. Although Warrene's early childhood years were in St. Paul, Minnesota, the family relocated to the San Fernando Valley area of California when she was still a preteen. It would seem they wanted her to make it in show business pretty badly. Warrene became a ballerina and then worked in summer stock theater. She ended up doing many USO shows for servicemen around the world, long before she made her first screen appearance. She went to Hollywood professional school sometime in the very late 1950s and was being groomed to be a starlet. Before she ever had her first TV role, she was already doing public events with established stars of TV and movies. Things were looking real good for early superstardom in 1961. She was cast as Betty in the pilot for an Archie TV series. She won out over 30,000 other teenage girls. Unfortunately for Warrene, the Archie series never saw the light of day. This was a pretty big setback for her early on, and she never really got another chance like that. I feel sorry for Warrene because I think she deserved it. Also, it would have been cool to see an Archie TV series back then. I liked the pilot that they did in 1964 with another cast. On the plus side, it doesn't appear that Warrene ever suffered financially in those days. She was living with her parents in Studio City, where they owned and operated the successful Ott's Motel. She was still living with them in 1968 when they became the victims of a robbery in which $250,000 of furs, jewelry, and cash were stolen. Warrene had small parts in mainstream movies. She was in the 1962 comedy If a Man Answers, starring Sandra Dee and Bobby Darin. Her next big production after this was the 1964 Robert Goulet comedy Honeymoon Hotel. Also that year was the Anne Margaret comedy The Pleasure Seekers. It took some time before Warrene got into another big movie, but that came in 1967 with the Walter Matthau comedy A Guide for the Married Man. In 1969 came the drama comedy Where It's At, starring David Janssen. It's important to state that all of these mainstream pictures had ensemble casts and featured a lot of well-known actors. Warrene may have not been a big name herself, but she worked with many of the people who were considered stars at that time. Odd enough, the B movies Warrene played in have probably become better known to audiences today. There was the sci-fi movie The Phantom Planet from 1961. Then there was the horror movie Black Zoo from 1963 starring Michael Gough. After that, she did the crime film Rat Fink from 1965. Then, of course, was The Undertaker and His Pals from 1966, followed by another horror movie, The Witchmaker in 1969. Her final movie was an adventure film, The Invincible Six from 1970 starring Ilka Summer. Warrene seemed to have better luck on television and was mostly in shows that were successful. These include Ripcord, The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, Alcoa Premier, Hawaiian Eye, Bewitched, Gomer Pyle USMC, and 3 appearances on the Beverly Hillbillies as different characters. Her episode of Gomer Pyle is noteworthy, as she plays a character who is central to the plot. She is Francine, the girlfriend of Gomer's friend Duke. Duke assigns Gomer to keep Francine company in his absence. Sergeant Carter thinks Gomer is going out with her, and a one-sided rivalry begins. After 1970, Warrene appears to have left show business. There really isn't much known about Warrene's activities after her acting career. She was briefly married in 1974, but it ended in divorce. At some point, she became a mother. She worked for the INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service. Sadly, she died on January 1st, 1995, at the age of 51 from a car accident. It appears Warrene's family was still well-to-do, because she was buried in a large, impressive-looking family sarcophagus at the famous Forest Lawn Cemetery of Hollywood Hills. There are a lot of actresses who never make it big like they should, but there was no excuse for Warrene not getting bigger and better parts. It does seem, for the most part, that she had a good life outside of show business. I do think that her TV and movie appearances hold up all these years later. Whatever part she plays, Warrene Ott always carries herself with a certain amount of poise and dignity. That quality alone is enough to earn her status as Babe of the Day, Babe of the Day.